So thank you, Daniel, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you showing up and being who you are. And I'm sure this is going to be an interesting conversation, especially for my audience that are mainly in the Middle East and Africa. And because there's on my daily show, I get a lot of people that talk about their addiction, which you would find strange coming from the Middle East and Africa. But there are some people that need help, that need to express themselves, need to tell their story, because generally when you look at their families and their culture, there's so much pressure that, this is taboo and, it shouldn't be talked about. It should be hidden, and, you know, it's not accepted. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I want to explore this, but, you know, my with all my podcasts, I always ask the first question is, where are you on that life journey of yours?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. That's nice to be on. Um, in my life journey, how to answer that? I, yeah, I mean, I found this profession as a psychiatrist through following my own curiosities in life. So fundamentally, what I like pursuing is truth and applied in this field. It's like, why exactly do we suffer? And so, it's usually not as obvious as people think. You go through this downfall, you have these fears, but you still have to ask, like, why exactly though is that suffering? Why is that not just difficult, for example? Um, so I love being able to apply that in my practice, and I like where I'm at in that part of the journey. Um, I feel like ahead for myself is to test out ways to apply that in more creative ways, to kind of I would call kind of map out human suffering. And I don't know what that'll end up looking like, but it could be imagery, poetry, music, or just straight up writing. But I want to pool together different ways to really help uh, teach and help in a way that resonates with people to understand the nature of their suffering.
Beautiful. I'm just curious, where you're standing now, do you feel you've got a full grasp of what you've learned, or are you always learning? Is every day, or always, is there something new that you didn't know?
Yeah. Well, I think I like that question, and it will perhaps reveal, uh, that maybe there's a lot more for me to learn that I still don't see major, huge areas, but I do feel like I've been closing the gaps more and more. And it's like anything. I mean, you never really get there, whether that's your knowledge, whether it's fitness or how kind you are. Um, yeah, I mean, certainly there's like millions, maybe literally, right, of books that would help me grow as a person or what I have to offer. But yeah, I mean, considering just from where I've started, I know that most gaps, have been closed enough that I feel like I've at least been oriented, if not very, very, well experienced in a lot of different disciplines. But when it comes to suffering, yeah, I mean, that's the whole gamut of our human experience. There's too many writings and spiritual dimensions to that. So, I mean, obviously, there's just so much to learn. And that's why I like this. So, yeah, I mean, even when you look at religion or what humans have done with that, there's endless stuff to learn. I'd need to live so many lives just to learn one religion completely. Um, but certainly I'm getting less out of those things over time than I got, in my 20s, 30s. So, um, but that's what I love about this whole area. I got really good advice when I was thinking about what to do with myself, and one of the things that resonated was go into a field or area that you would, even if you weren't in that career. just never want to stop reading about, learning about, and growing in. And that's really been a pleasure and held very true for me.
Mm. How old were you when you started this journey?
I mean, looking back, I'd say just as far back as I can remember, because I'm very philosophical and analytical. So I had the components to that from as far as I could see, and there would be friends that would be experiencing something. So, like, I had a friend, gosh, I was, I don't know, 11, 12 when I had a friend going through, pretty bad addiction, behavioral issues, and just wondering, like, why. He seemingly had an okay this and that, but not in this area. Um, and then it got, really developed though in medical school because I could see firsthand, people are coming to clinic. They already know what to do to eat well or to not drink. And yet you got all these sick people coming there. And if you start to have a real conversation, they were obviously not just struggling with the knowledge. And so that really piqued my interest. And and then that interest got really fed in residency where we learned to do, really good therapy. And um, so that's when it, really came together in
Mm.
residency.
I'm always amazed. I I was a little bit like you, but not in a deep way. It was always I was always curious about how society never really took this seriously. That it was always superficial. It was always how you looked. It's always about the muscles, and I wa- just standing on the sidelines, I was lost in what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a pop star. I wanted to create music. So that that side of it, I never really looked into until I, you know, went on this coaching journey, and it kind of fed into that curiosity when I was younger about why is no one talking about this? Because surely this is like the CPU, central processing unit, that controls everything.
Hmm.
And no one really talks about it. No one's talking about the health of the mind. No one's, if you're watching a football match and they're criticizing a player because he's not performing well, they're not asking, well, I wonder what's behind that. I wonder why he's not playing very well. I wonder if he's had an argument with his wife or that wasn't in the conversation. They were just blaming him. Oh, he's terrible. He shouldn't be playing. Well, be curious.
Hmm.
Ask him maybe once he's come off the field, what's going on. But it was never talked about. It's only I don't know. You're the expert when it comes to what you've seen and how as a race are we becoming more aware, or you're hearing it more and more. It seems to become the norm to talk about mental health. But was it strange for you when you were younger that this wasn't really talked about?
Yeah. Yeah. I think people pay good lip service to talking about like self care, boundaries, well being. People talk about now like EQ, right? Like emotional intelligence. And so they'll say these things, but I do notice then this like severe gap between paying lip service or saying these things or acknowledging that there's stuff that happens for people to describe their behaviors, but not really address the middle bits, right? So like, okay, this person, oh yeah, they had a trauma or a bad childhood. Yes, like we're smart enough now to know connect that dot with some behavior nowadays. uh, when you miss the middle bits, it's like, "Oh, but Jim had a trauma and now he's, a lead singer somewhere. Or he had a trauma and he's a good soccer player, so, or a lawyer." So people then misattribute, like, what that pathway or what that really means. So
Hmm.
you can have, like, for example, a terrible childhood, and some people are wildly successful out of that, and other people crumble, right? And they're incarcerated, they're drugs and alcohol, and so people really don't talk about, like, what actually happens in the middle bits there to understand it. So that's what I notice the most, as far as what you're talking about, where I see people speak too generally and broadly about certain connections or causalities, and not talk about like the true mechanisms behind those.
Mm. So on your specific journey, what made you focus on addiction? What was it that made you focus on this area specifically?
Yeah. I I think what's compelled me the most is that um it's like squarely inside of what interests me, where we know what to do with ourselves, but we can't get ourselves to do it. And so one of the earlier similar fields I've been very interested in and still is overeating, or just eating things you shouldn't be, because I I saw that, early in my medical training, like, people know what to do, but why aren't they doing it? And that just fascinates me, because it to understand that or to treat that, you have to really go on that journey to understand really how our minds work, how our feelings work, how we regulate our emotions, how our, like, cognitive biases, normalization, society. You have to understand even the industries involved in that thing, whether it's the food industry, marketing, FDA regulation. So, like, to really grasp some of these things, it launches this, like, really deep exploration into all those, and I like that the problem of addiction is just squarely inside of this. It's like, we
Mm.
obviously know it's bad for us, and then everyone has got vices. So why? And and so I just love the problem that presents, and solving that to me is, um, the same thing you're trying to solve in other areas, but it's just even more poignant and dramatic. So it's like, okay, well, so an example of what's not an addiction, but a similar question would be, okay, you're really depressed, but like, get regular sleep, wake up at a good regular time, exercise in the morning, eat well, try and socialize, maintain good friendships, try to be productive, all these nice things. So you know what to do for your depression. Maybe you need to grieve or something, but but you're stuck in depression. Why? Like, why exactly? And um, and so it is a similar question in other kinds of ways we suffer, but I just like addiction because it's even more obvious and poignant that there's a gap in between knowledge and behavior.
So where has that taken you, and what have you learned on this journey when you focused on addiction?
So one thing particular to addiction, I think a lot of people miss, that it's taken me, to understand a piece together. To back up for a second, so um, we definitely know, and few people will argue with the fact that, uh, people with an ongoing real battle with addiction. I'm not just talking about like an occasional extra drink. I'm talking about like a real ongoing issue. 100% of the time have some underlying emotional distress, grief. Could be severe trauma they dealt with, could be a much more minor one like boredom, emptiness, maybe just a bad marriage, things like that aren't mental illness, but just they are problems. Uh, so everyone with an ongoing battle with addiction, drinking problem, has that. Okay. But then what has not been answered very well and written much about clinically is, so if we know, let's just call it depression. If someone's depressed and that can cause addiction, well, then why is everyone who's depressed not addicted? And so my research and journey has taught me, that there's a facilitator there, and it's not being able to tolerate an internal distress. So the internal tension, pressure, discomfort, when we cannot tolerate that internal experience, we turn to the external environment to regulate our internal state. Versus some other people, right, have depression, anxiety, PTSD, and they do not have an addiction always. And the reason is because despite however bad the feelings are, they actually can tolerate that internal experience. They're not saying it's okay or they like it, but they can tolerate it, whereas people with addiction don't. And some people have such an intolerance for a negative internal state that they can have vices and addiction for very, very small distress. So I wouldn't say it's always proportional. It's not like the more you're depressed or anxious or pissed off, the more addiction you have. The more key feature for why someone is so heavily addicted would be more in the intolerance for that internal state.
And this addiction can be in anything, whatever relieves that tension that's happening inside. It's whatever what is accessible, that is easy to come by, that's something, or is it something that they may have seen? Or, how do we get addicted? How do we get addicted to a certain, either something that we eat or something that we look at, or how why is it specific to the type of addiction? Not the type of addiction, but
The object of the addiction.
yeah.
Yeah, most of that, like around what is the object of the addiction? Because it could be heroin, it could be alcohol, could be candy, right? Could be
Mm.
porn, because so it can be everything. It could be shopping. Um, I view it all as a similar process. It's more just that the objects, certain things have their own profiles of risk, safety, danger, how ugly they are to society, right? So they all have their own unique profiles culturally, and some kill you and some could never kill you. But and so they are very different in their outcome, but the underlying process is remarkably similar. And so I like to help people focus on that process rather than the object itself, because that usually will distract people from what's actually going on internally in their mind and also emotionally, psychologically. So to try and answer your question though, yeah, the object of the addiction is kind of arrived at twofold, although, I'll try and simplify it, because it's more than there's sub parts of each of these, but one is culturally. So like think more like microculture. So, you grow up, if you're growing up in a group where those kids are, heavy drinkers, you're obviously going to get sort of swept into that path. If they're using hard drugs early, it could be that. But it could also be that they're up to mischief, or and then the pattern also could be different. It might be that it's like sneaking away Saturday night, right? Versus maybe a neighborhood or friend group where there's less accountability and it's like it can be every day or anytime. Um, and your parents aren't even asking if you went to school, right? So we grow up in very different ways all over the world, and the micro environments are even more variable
Mm.
than like countries or or macro cultures. So so those have an enormous influence. I would say that's most of the influence. But then there's also the other category would be unique profiles of each one, where forget now what your microculture is. There might just still be fundamental differences between things. So, like overeating, choosing like candy and sugar. Um, yes, that might be partly with your friend group. Like you may turn to food together and enjoy that, and be overweight together. Um, but there are unique profiles, right, to overeating, which is, it's safe. It's not going to be as dramatic and sort of scary to your family and stuff. So like, so if you're someone who is really risk averse or neurotic or other things, it might fit your profile to choose something like porn or, you know, excessive candy or sugar, versus someone else. I'll paint another picture as like maybe someone, not just that you're a risk taker, but super low esteem, lonely, and just feel like you're a piece of shit. You may be more willing to sabotage more dramatically to sort of tell your story to the world, you could think of. So you might be
Mm,
drinking more heavily in a way that, that tells that story, where if you were to slowly gain weight over 8 years, it doesn't tell a compelling story. It's not very clear that you're troubled or being left alone or marginalized or misunderstood. Whereas, getting in a more wildly dramatic problem with alcohol, like at work or with a spouse, um, you could think of as like a cry for attention. It's not quite what I'm saying. It's something deeper, right? That where you're telling more of a story. So that, and there's more to say, but that I'm putting back in this category of like there are unique profiles to each object, and we bring in some object relations theory when we're talking in the psychology, like clinically, to think of like what is that object doing for us? How do we relate to it? What story does it tell? Um, but of course, depending where you are, that there still might be a few different potential objects on the menu, even for that one way, right? So it could be alcohol, maybe it could be kratom, or using heavy amounts of marijuana, or like there could be other similar adjacent levels of like risk, um, and so yeah, we have a way of finding objects culturally, but also that fit our unique story.
mm. I'm just thinking, no, you you said it. I was just about to ask you or focus on that cry to help. But what came after that was, um, how does anyone, where's the cutoff point, or where's the point where someone says, I'm addicted to this or that? Does it come from them themselves, or is it the people around them? How does it generally work that you either you say, look, I this is ruining my life and I'm addicted to this substance or whatever, or is it the people around them that raise the red flag and say, you need help, we're going to get you help, etc.? Is there a correlation? Is there a clear way that this happens, or
Yeah. Well, I'll start with like the textbook answer. So, like in a substance use disorder, and an alcohol use disorder is a subtype of that. So we have like tobacco use disorder, opioid use disorder. There are 11 criteria, and you only need a few of those 11 criteria to qualify to say, I have a something use disorder, and then that's the clinical way of describing addiction. We don't diagnose addiction, we diagnose a substance use disorder. So there are criteria, you have to have those, and it, has to be bad enough, and any time in the last 12 months, and so on. So there are hard criteria. I like to remind people that's really more for research than that, okay, Jim, yes, you have an addiction. Um, Obviously, it's a fluid thing. Okay, so another important point to make, though, is the reason I define it in the way I do, which is it's addiction is the escape of an underlying emotional distress. The
Mhm.
reason I call it that is because that's the best way to understand it. And so, yes, some people have it way worse, or they choose a worse object for their addiction, but the underlying process is what we need to pay attention to. And so we're really all on that spectrum if we pay close enough attention. Because you could
Yeah.
say, well, by your definition, if you just have a little Hershey's Kiss at the end of your workday, and it's because you're kind of just spent or exhausted, or you know, or just feeling like you don't know what to do with yourself, like isn't that addiction by your definition? I say, well, yes, not to the level necessarily that someone would need treatment for that, or it's not creating life dysfunction, but yeah, I mean, you're a point oh something percent on that spectrum
Mm,
as the same person, who's got like multiple time a day heroin addiction. And so don't view that heroin addict as, let's say, completely faulty and so different, right? They're trying to escape life's problems, but we all do, like, throughout the day. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna definitely partake in some form of vice today, and I think that can be a nice part of life, but we need to be in mastery of it, and it needs to be deliberate, right? As a product of something we feel like is a good choice for us. So there's all kinds of differences, right, between someone who's like mostly well and a heroin addict that's using multiple times throughout the day and nodding, all day long. But but yeah, the spectrum is something we're all on, and I think it's a losing battle to try and say like, oh, at this one point you've become an addict. That's really more for research purposes. And by the way, the terminology I think distracts us as well. So not just the idea of like on off, like you either have an addiction or not,
Mm,
as far as it being binary. But even the terminology is very misleading and makes people lose track of what to do. So to say, I'm Daniel, I'm an alcoholic, or, I'm Daniel, I have an addiction. People think of that as like this courageous thing, like I'm raising my hand and I admit like I have a problem and it's vulnerable. And it's actually, to me, the wrong kind of vulnerability because we're now attaching a label or a word that's shorthand for things that are much more intimate. So if I drink because I am in a really bad marriage, I should just say that, say that I drink because I don't know, I feel trapped in this family life. I'm in a bad marriage and I don't know a better way to deal with that emotionally, and it's my shortcut to doing that. Now
mm,
that's vulnerable, and that does not distract from what is really going on and what the problem is. But if I say I'm an alcoholic, what do I do with that? My argument, tongue in cheek, is I don't even know, as a specialist in this, like, if someone says I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic, I don't know what to do for you. And I'm not even kidding. Like I won't know what to do until we understand the actual problem at hand. What do I do other than say just don't drink that much or try not to
mm,
drink at all? Like there's no productive framing there. There's no action to take. But if you talk about a bad marriage, there's a lot we can look at, ranging from communication to how y'all relate to each other to histories and baggage and all kinds of stuff, resentments. We can also do a lot with that if you're turning to that because of the bad marriage. Like, do you not have, peers you can turn to? Do you not have activities and hobbies or a larger life that you're able to lean on? Do you have other activities you can do in your kind of piss off moments? Like, there's so many things to look at if you state accurately what you're actually suffering with. But you see, if that person just said, I'm an alcoholic, what does that mean? Should I be scared of you? Should I be trying to help you? What do I even say? Was there's no trick for that anyway. There's now you're stuck with where people get stuck is like, that's just willpower now. I'm an alcoholic. I don't know how to stop. Okay, well, you need to try harder. It's just, you got to strong, use your willpower, you know better. And that's not a real strategy. I call that a command. So when we're shorthand with our labels and we just say, I'm depressed or I have an addiction, I'm an alcoholic, it's so vague and shuts off the opportunity to look at the real things, that you then in turn get vague answers, which is either an antidepressant or willpower, or it's a command. That's not treatment, it's not therapy, it's not a journey. It becomes a command to just make the right choice. It's like, well, if you've been depressed that long and you know better, you just need to get out. Now that's a command. That's not an actual therapeutic strategy.
wow. You, I never knew about addiction. And I always thought it was an illness. And as you say, there, because I met people that have gone through the AA system, and as you say, they stand up, and you see films where they stand up and they say, "Hey, I'm an alcoholic," and that's the label. But as you say, it's more to it than that, rather than, just, "Oh, well, you're an alcoholic." Okay. And but is there education? Because surely this should be out more, letting the general public know what addiction is. And I'm sure, as you've been on this journey, you've learned a lot about the old ways, the way it was always viewed, to where you are now. So is that information getting out there? Is Because I didn't know. I know there's a clinic here in Qatar that helps addiction, but I'm none the wiser of what goes on, or why people are addicted, etc., etc. I just feel, you know, poor them, that they are addicted to something and they can't get over it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there is just a very vast, like, lacking of reaching people with, like, more accurate frameworks and understanding, so, yeah, yeah, I mean, you can tell, I'm not one for labels and things, and that's, unfortunately, one of the first things people do in an AA meeting, and, actually, the patient that I just saw before we hopped on this, that's something I'm teaching him. He's come from actually decades steeped in, he's been to 7 rehabs, AA, proud to have been to AA as many times as he has. And so the poor guy has been led to believe that he's failing because he's not trying hard enough and he's not a good enough student of AA, because
Mm,
that's usually the answer. Whereas, no, if you have a better accurate understanding of the nature of your suffering, you don't have to go to 7 treatments. It's one continuous journey, and that should, be an expansive journey that actually gets easier and grows over time. So, the kind of therapy that I was fortunate enough to be exposed to and learn is called psychodynamic psychotherapy, and one of the cool things is when I treat a patient and then they leave, the effect of it grows over time. So, good therapy expands and grows even when you're done. Whereas most other forms, we have documented research on follow-up studies, the effect wanes because you're sort of propping up or not necessarily uh, embedding the right seeds, that can grow. So, but back to your question, no, it really does get missed. And like I was saying earlier with one of your questions, I think people at least understand enough to know that people with addiction are troubled and they
mm,
usually have some speckled past. Um, but I don't think people understand what that really means or the conduit to go from there to addiction. So, it is usually left up to, like, you just need to try harder. It's
mm,
willpower. You need to care more. You need to be more responsible. And those are all, in my view, I just lump them in the category of commands.
yeah,
Those are not actual strategies. And correct. I don't think most people get exposure to actual strategies. It's more like, just here's what's wrong with what you're doing. Here's the right thing to do. And if it's one level deeper, it's like a better inventory of what's going wrong in your life, past or present. But like not the like, okay, but what do I actually do? People
yeah.
are usually left with this gaping hole there, and there are good answers. I mean, there are wonderful therapeutic approaches to these things, but it starts with just the correct frameworks and words to use.
Mm. So I'm curious. So you have the AA, which deals with addiction in a group setting, and it is global. With the way you're explaining, is there an alternative that can deal with a lot of people, or does it have to be one-on-one sessions?
No, I believe and that's why I like doing these. I think when you have the right seeds planted, you can either get ahead of the issue or start to correct it with good education. And so something I'm very proud of is, to be a physician, it's a doctor. And the true definition of the word doctor if we're being more literal, is a teacher. And so I take that very seriously with honor that, I'm essentially in the end a real teacher to whether it's a patient, a student that I'm supervising or teaching in the med school, or like this, right? For people listening, I like for this to feel more like a teacher student. Not that I need to be above people, but that is what I'm doing, right? I'm teaching. So I'm not your buddy peer saying, I've also been addicted. Isn't this so bad? I get it. Yeah, it's terrible. Here's something I've tried. There's a place for groups, okay? And there's a place for good friends and peers, some of whom have better ideas than you, some of whom have walked the same path, some of whom will cheerlead. Those are all
Mm.
good pieces to have in your life. But as far as like clinical care or this podcast or other things, there needs to be proper teaching. And so I take that seriously. And yes, I think instead of necessarily thinking of it like, everyone's got to go into one-on-one therapy and have like endless therapy sessions for years, it's better instead to think of, I need to uncover my own personal teachings, right? I need to see what I need to learn. And if you learn the right things, you will improve. So I don't necessarily make a big distinction between very good, detailed, precise teaching and therapy. Um, and even though I have trained under analyst method, right? So and analysts are notoriously silent and don't really teach, and so I don't do that style of analysis. I definitely listen to people, but when I hear them expose a way of thinking that's a little bit off or inaccurate or sloppy, that's when I come in and I teach and I say, okay, well, you said this or that. Whoa, whoa. What did you just do there? Did you notice that?
Mm.
And so, and then that's a teaching moment, right? So therapy is really teaching, but just the one-on-one just lets you do it in an accelerated and very particular fashion. Um, but if you are just digesting things and learning on your own, whether it's podcasts, books, other kinds of courses, um, if you feel like you know yourself and you know what you need to learn and you can find the right teacher, that can be an amazing way of improving your life.
But don't you think that some people like having just the label, that it 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 gets them out of actually learning to get out of this situation? It's like, yeah, there's my label. This is who I am. All right, I've got my buddy. They've been through the same thing, and maybe eventually I'll be able to get over this addiction at some point. But this is who I am. Where you're suggesting that, no, look, you can take action. You can really learn the tools to help yourself move away from this label. Because I'm the same. I don't like labels. I always feel that when someone says, "Oh yeah, you've got that," or you've got that, it gives people an excuse just to say, "I don't need to bother. I've just got the label, and this is me." Any situation that I come across here,
Mhm.
I'm not going to excuse myself, but look, this is the reason why I'm acting this way, etc. Because look, it's the label that I'm wearing, and it's just like, no, you need to take off that label. You need to be the experiment. You need to learn more about yourself rather than just take a label that someone else has given you.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so one way to put that is we need to understand what we're doing with the words or the labels. So
Mm,
the best example of where it's serves a really good purpose is in research, because if I'm going to research using a medication for uh, certain kinds of substances, have very good medications for them. So if we're going to study that and we want to look at success rates, we have to define what that addiction is. And then we have to define those measures of like success. And so is it sobriety? So are you sober? And that's a label, or or as a measure other functional improvements, right? So your relationships and things. And we have to define everything if you're doing research because you need numbers and you need to analyze those and look for effect sizes and all that. So that's an example where we really need labels, or else if you, every study is making up their own idea of what we
Yeah.
call turning to vices, sort of on the spectrum, what I'm talking about does not work on a research study. Um, it also is very good if I'm doing, communication around a patient with a rehab, someone who's discharging or, just any interfacing in the medical system. A label is not a full description, right? But it's a very quick one to help understand, okay, I kind of know who you're talking about. I kind of know what this case is going to be. Um, and so on, right? And so a clinic might need to use labels because it's like, well, but what the hell are y'all doing here? What are you treating? And so the one you're referring to by you, yeah, whether you like or not the label, like, here's what we do. And so, um, so it can also help to show up at the right meeting, because I don't want to go to a grief group. I'm trying to go to an alcohol, anonymous group, and I need to know what it's called so that I know if I'm in the right spot. Um, so
I
so
hear you.
there's
Yeah.
so those are reasons, where it helps. It helps when you have a book that has a title. So it helps to have the words to know you're kind of in the right area. We just have to be careful as individuals for what we're making of that word and what we're doing with it. And like you said, now if to call myself an alcoholic, it goes both ways, right? Number one, well, that's doesn't mean very much, like I was saying earlier, and so now maybe I'm calling myself an alcoholic, and I think that's the end of the road rather than like the beginning of trying to understand what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Label could get in your way there. It could also get in your way if now it's just part of hating on yourself. And so I'm all too excited to say, look, see, I really am a piece of shit. I'm not just drinking a lot. I'm an alcoholic. Like
Yeah.
I'm I'm now in this disease state and it's ugly and despicable. We may also use it for another reason, like you said, is like, "Hey, dear, don't be so mean to me. Don't expect that I can be sober tomorrow. I'm an alcoholic with a disease, right? And this is like a real serious clinical thing, and you need
Yeah.
to be patient and understand that diseases have like relapsing and remitting courses, just like asthma and allergies, and so you need to kind of back off and give me grace." So people can use it in all kinds of different ways,
Mm.
and so we have to be careful about how we're using it. And my and so I don't mind when people use labels. It's just, do you understand how you're using it? And ultimately, when we're really working on ourselves, no matter what you're calling your uh, state, whatever you're calling the clinic or the group, just that you then start to peel back so that you're not using the label at some point and just speaking directly to the truth and the
Mm.
nature of how you suffer.
Nice. So, what have you put in place? What are you doing at this present moment? What have you created?
Um, so, a lot of how I spend my time is in my practice, where I don't just see addiction. I see kind of the range of diseases, and like we just say, I don't get people in here and then we don't call it that. But yeah, depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction as well. Then, um, but yeah, a lot of what I've spent time, creating that has been a very fun project is with this program I call self recovery, and that's where anybody can go online to take a very complete holistic curriculum to deal with their now we're going to both be self-conscious but call it an addiction, but it's really for anybody. It could be that you're using candy too much, could be porn, could be alcohol, because the whole idea is it's getting to the root of what's causing the behavior you don't want despite you knowing better. So the whole program is designed to be available for anybody. People have used it, from Africa and Arab countries where they either don't have treatments or it's taboo, and it's not something you're going to raise your hand for or get anybody um, to have on their radar about you. So yeah, some people are using it because there's no access or for that full privacy. But yeah, it's a complete program that walks through uh, all the components of the turning away from our internal state to something external to regulate ourselves. That's essentially what the program is.
And is it just is it videos, or is it just words, or how is it presented? How
Yeah, the core of it is videos, so they're short videos by me from like 2 to 10 minutes, and there's like a whole complete curriculum and series of those, so there's lots of those, and then paired with each video lesson, there's music to connect emotionally to certain topics and themes. There are resources and links, and so there's always evidence and full citations for everything that I, teach on. Then there's links for further learning on certain ones because even though the program is fairly complete, there might be a particular area or an app or a book or another longer talk that really expands upon it. So there's those inside each lesson. Um, there's discussions in there. And then after each lesson, there are exercises to do. And so those might be prompts that help you reflect on something. It might be a sort of prompt to challenge yourself on a particular area and give something a little bit of a try. So, depending on what the lesson is, there's some pairing of an exercise and reflection of some sort. There's also daily reflections in there that help to grow the particular parts of our brain we need to grow to regulate ourselves better and to be kind, but still particular around dealing with our issues. And then there's a mindfulness series that is particularly designed. I teamed up with Geeta Kaulagi, who's just this amazing mindfulness expert. So we teamed up to make a mindfulness series particularly for this kind of pattern. Um, and so yeah, that's mostly what it's comprised of. Then there's some handouts and other kinds of things in there, but yeah, it's mostly video lessons, and then there's music and exercises paired with each one.
nice. I'm just curious, how long did that take you to put that all together?
About 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, because I contracted with an educational design group to make sure that I was going to do it right because I've seen these where it's just kind of information only.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I wanted to really make sure it had impact and that there was every chance for someone to translate that into real change. So the length of the program, the way the videos are, the pairings, it did take a lot of planning to make sure to get it right since you're not in there with the room. This is all pre-recorded, and I think that's obvious from the way we're talking about it. But just to be clear, it's not my live treatment, right? It's there for you to just do on your own time privately, and so there's you know that means it's got to be done right, so that whenever people are accessing it, it has the right components to change.
And as you say, this is effective for anyone. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter what cultural background, doesn't matter what religion you follow, etc., etc. It is for everyone.
correct. Yeah, so it's secular, and while while I really appreciate what religion has to say about a lot of these topics, and I like working with that when I have individuals here with that, the program, needs to be secular because I I work from a first principles basis, which means, we just have to ask fundamental questions, and we should be using only philosophy and logic to arrive at those. It's sort of Euclidean in that sense. So religion, although it has great power to it, what it demands of people is faith, right? So we have to take either the Bible, Word of God, or something on faith, right? That this was delivered in this manner, or that it is the ultimate truth. I don't want to ask people to do that in my treatments, and so the program, yeah, is secular. So we do arrive at actually deeply spiritual ideas in there, and I actually help people arrive at their own tenets and
Yeah.
essentially kind of like their own um, religion. you could say. But they arrive at that with logic and philosophy. So we arrive at those concepts slowly and build up to that. So people do create their own um, rules, if you will, on what will be a meaningful life to them.
Mm,
So we're bringing in some of those deeper aspects, but it's built in a very secular fashion. Um, and that's the right way to build lasting change, right? Is to have it rest on only things that you are so certain must be true. Because if there's weak blocks underneath, it can topple over.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm just curious, when did it took you 2 years, and when did you release it? And since releasing it, have you, as you're going on that journey, as you're learning more and more, do you revisit it? Do you add? Do you change anything that you initially put down?
Yeah. So I think I went live with it 8 years ago, I believe. I might be off a little bit. And yeah, I mean, it's been very well received. It is in over 40 countries now. So to speak to how universal it is, because it doesn't rely on a culturally bound belief or anything. Um, and that's how, there's people all over the world that don't have great access.
Mm,
Yeah, there's some pieces in there that I've updated. And to be honest, it'd be really cool to do this again using AI to to help people have a very personalized journey through there. So if I were to critique it, I'd say, like, um, out of 100 lessons, you might feel like, seven of them are like spot on, resonate, and will really change you, and then there might be, a lot that are just good to build on, or things like that, and then there might be a few that are just no, sorry, that's just not my issue, that's not me. And so I think with AI, there'd be a chance to make that personalized and just, um, yeah, less sort of just like go through this whole curriculum and trust me that it'll address what you need in there. Um, so so yeah, I do think it could be improved upon. That would be kind of the next iteration of the project.
nice. So that could nicely lead on to my final question. Moving forward, is that something that you are looking into?
Yeah, but I'm gonna try to just go to the top. I want to create this sort of map of human suffering. That's sort of my ultimate project in mind. And so what I wanna do is try to try to create an experience where you come in with firsthand access to what am I going through? And so that could be that you're drinking too much, it could be that you're angry or that you don't sleep very well or you're crying or you come in with some kind of symptom or um, understanding of like what is actually hurting you right now. And then that's a launching point. And and if I map it out in a detailed and accurate enough fashion, I want to then help take you on that journey and make it as personalized as possible to understand exactly what's wrong for you, because that's what I'm saying is so wrong with treatments and the books and everything is like you it's so hard to get to the bit that you really really need. It's usually for someone just one or two very key precise things that will unlock that whole sort of life change. Um and so I do believe that that's possible. I have not seen that to be done yet. There's things that will sometimes try to define all the ways that we can hurt or subtypes of depression. Certainly, there's good work in those areas, but not more of like a web of all of that. So that's what I would like to do, but that's going to be a multi-year thing, and I think AI will help a lot with that.
Absolutely. Wow. That would be amazing. If you could literally come in and say, look, this is my issue. And then you're handed like a roadmap of what what you need to go through, your own specific journey
Exactly.
to help you get to the destination.
Yeah. I think
What
that's gonna be possible here coming up.
oh, yeah, I can imagine, especially with AI, and I love what you're thinking about AI and, being very specific to your own issue with your own addiction and walking beside you and helping you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Daniel. This has been amazing. This has been an eye opener for me and it's been fascinating.
Yeah, I've been very, very happy to join, and this is a wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me.
And look, if there is another step that you go on that you need to let people know, then please let me know. And I'd love to have you on board and discover what you're working on, except or what you're releasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope to have that one day.
Okay. And how can people find you and how can people find this online recovery course?
Yeah, the program is at selfrecovery.org, and it's pretty self-explanatory on there, and then I've got some social handles on there, as well. But yeah, selfrecovery.org is where it's at.
And what about you? Can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, just Daniel Hochman, and then, yeah, I'm on, Facebook, Instagram. It's under Self Recovery or Self Recovery Health.
Okay, superb. Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you again for taking us on this amazing journey, inspirational, informative, and giving us more of a insight into addiction and all aspects about it. I really appreciate it, and you've opened my eyes as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time, next week. You take care. Bye bye.